From fake prophecies to how supposedly dead Dothraki keep showing up, here are the biggest plot holes in Game of Thrones. Starting with how Euron's men are mutes no more. After Euron's attack on Daenerys and her army's success, Daenerys goes after Euron's fleet on her way to King's Landing to start the siege. She flies in on Drogon and sets fire to the whole fleet. She gets to do it, but if you listen carefully, you can hear men screaming, which wouldn't be so strange during a dragon attack if there wasn't one important difference. Euron's whole crew is made up of mutes. This happened just a few shows ago, so why does Euron suddenly not remember it? But even that's not as glaringly obvious as death being a walk in the park. Some characters didn't even notice when they got injured. After the waif stabs Arya in the stomach over and over, she seems to be dead. Instead, she jumps into a nearby river and makes it to a friend's house to get medical help before going back to fight the waif. The same thing happens in Season 8, when Jaime gets the same stomach cuts after a fight with Euron. Even though he's still bleeding a lot, Jaime makes it all the way back to the Red Keep to see Cersei.
You're hurt.
At least now people know that if you're a main character with a stomach wound, you're probably gonna make it through the scene. Painless injuries are one thing, but this one's just straight up funny. Many predictions don't come true. Prophecies are all over Game of Thrones, which makes sense for a show with such a magical and mysterious setting. This gave people a lot to think about between seasons. People were happy to get answers to at least some of these prophecies, right? But in a disappointing turn of events, none of these predictions ever came true. Daenerys dies without ever being able to find out if she could have kids. Also, someone with green eyes is never killed by Arya. Even after all the time the show spent on these in previous seasons, they seem to just go away.
I see a darkness in you. And in that darkness, eyes staring back.
Speaking of things just going away, it was a little disappointing to see this group just fall off like that. The Night's Watch lost its reason for being. Jon Snow was sent to Castle Black to serve in the Night's Watch for the rest of his life as punishment for killing Daenerys. Even though the Mad Queen probably would have killed thousands more innocent people in her drive to rule the world. This puts him right back where he started. Except for one big problem, that'd be fine. And maybe even a romantic finish for Ned Stark's secret Targaryen, who will now be hidden away at the Wall. Now that Arya killed the army of the dead, and Jon Snow has made peace between the wildlings and the people of Westeros, the Night's Watch doesn't seem to serve any purpose. Jon seemed to feel the same way because he asks Tyrion why the Night's Watch exists. But since he doesn't get an answer, neither do we. So they don't know why Jon would have to take the black again. But at the end of the last episode, Jon, Tormund, and Jon's direwolf Ghost are seen going north of the Wall, surrounded by wildlings. Which makes some people think that Jon's on his way to becoming the king beyond the Wall, which could mean that the Night's Watch is over. But since this hasn't been proven, there's no good reason for the Night's Watch to stay.
The North is free thanks to you.
When some things disappear though, they should stay gone, or it won't add up, like this next group of warriors that just never seemed to die. The Dothraki, who can increase by magic. At the start of the Battle of Winterfell, Daenerys is in a very bad position. Melisandre gives the Dragon Queen's Dothraki army flaming swords, all to help them attack the army of the dead. But in one of the most terrifying scenes of the whole series, the flames are quickly and quietly put out. This horrifies both the characters and us. Only Jorah Mormont, Ghost, and a few Dothraki who were running away from the dead were able to avoid being killed. Because of this, most people thought that the Dothraki army, almost all of which had followed Daenerys from Vaes Dothrak, was pretty much gone after the Battle of Winterfell. But in the next 3 shows, something very strange started to happen. More and more Dothraki kept showing up, and it seemed like there were more and more each episode, until the series ended.
Get 500 more.
Yes, my lord.
That's when Daenerys gave an inspiring speech to the rest of her Unsullied army, which is still strangely big, and a huge crowd of cheering Dothraki fighters. Unless the Dothraki have a special power that we've never heard of, Daenerys shouldn't have that many Dothraki men left by the end of the show. But even that isn't as weird as the speed of transport in the fantasy world. The circle of time seems to be flat. At the start of Game of Thrones, so many people were going on different adventures and journeys that long trips were a natural part of the story. Westeros isn't exactly a small place, and getting from Winterfell, which is way up north, to King's Landing, which is pretty far south, would take a long time. When you think about how long it took Daenerys to cross the Narrow Sea and get to Westeros, you can see that traveling around this world is no easy task. But in the later seasons of the show, people seem to appear out of nowhere whenever they want or wherever the story needs them to. This totally changes how time and space work in the Seven Kingdoms and beyond. In a Season 7 episode, a character runs across a huge area of land beyond the Wall to send a raven, which seems to move at fast speed based on how quickly Daenerys gets the message and comes to save the day after getting it. In Season 8, it gets even worse, with people flying from Winterfell to Dragonstone to King's Landing in almost no time at all. Euron couldn't swim that fast. Keeping the plot moving quickly is important, but in the last few seasons of Game of Thrones, the characters move way too fast. This is way too big of a plot hole to ignore. Speaking of people moving too fast, as far as I know, places can't move. But it looked like King's Landing did. King's Landing is the main city of Westeros. It's said to be a beautiful city that sits right on the water. King's Landing was filmed in a place that looks a lot like King's Landing and has a lot of the same features. After filming some King's Landing shots in Malta during the first season, production went to Dubrovnik, Croatia, which was used as a stand-in for the city of the Seven Kingdoms for the rest of the show. And it's easy to see why. The Jewel of the Adriatic looks just like King's Landing, because it's in a peaceful area and has beautiful surroundings. During a standoff in the 8th season of the show, though, King's Landing seems to have changed a lot. Instead of the green, rich entrance seen in previous seasons, it's now ringed by a huge stretch of desert. If this is meant to show that the city's natural supplies are running out, it's never talked about or explained. As it stands, it's just a strange difference that the showrunner should have known would be noticed. That's all for the biggest plot holes in Game of Thrones.